The morning sun stretched across the wide open plains, spilling its golden warmth over the rugged land that had been home to Samuel Carter for nearly 2 decades. He was a man carved by the frontier, tall, broad-shouldered, with weathered hands and a face lined with the quiet toll of solitude. For 15 long years, Samuel had lived alone on his ranch, tending to cattle, mending fences, and talking more to the wind and the horses than to another soul. His neighbors were miles away, and his only real company had been the rhythmic sounds of hooves, the rustle of prairie grass, and the occasional howl of coyotes under the moonlight. It wasn't that he hated people, Samuel simply didn't trust them anymore. Years ago, when his heart had been fresh and eager, he had been in love. She left him without a word, breaking him in ways he never let himself admit. Since then, women had been like ghosts, distant, unreachable, not meant for him. That morning seemed like any other. He had been repairing a broken fence line when the dust cloud from the old stagecoach caught his attention. It was unusual, stagecoaches rarely stopped near his ranch unless something had gone wrong. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Samuel leaned against the wooden post, narrowing his eyes at the sight of the horses slowing to a halt near his gate. When the door swung open, what stepped out wasn't a lost traveler or a ranch hand looking for work. It was a woman, a young woman with a delicate bonnet and travel-worn dress, her eyes wide as she stepped onto the dirt with a suitcase in hand. Samuel froze, blinking, as though his mind was playing tricks on him. She looked so out of place against the harsh, dusty land, like a painting come alive. The driver tipped his hat at Samuel, muttering something about her being delivered as requested, before cracking his whip and riding away. Samuel's jaw tightened. Delivered? He hadn't requested anyone. His ranch wasn't a place for guests, let alone a stranger, and especially not a woman. Yet the young lady stood there, clutching her case, glancing around nervously before her gaze settled on him. "Are you, Mr. Samuel Carter?" she asked softly, her voice carrying both hope and hesitation. Samuel's brow furrowed. He took a slow step forward, boots crunching in the gravel, before giving a firm nod. "That'd be me, but I think there's been a mistake," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of 15 years of silence. Her face flushed, and she bit her lip. "I was told, you sent for me. That you were in need of a bride. I signed the papers, and the agency," her voice trailed off, and she looked down, embarrassed, clutching her suitcase tighter. Samuel's stomach sank. Mail-order brides were not unheard of out here on the frontier. Many lonely men sent for women from the east to start families, to fight back the crushing solitude. But Samuel had never sent for anyone. The thought alone was absurd. And yet here she was, standing on his land, believing she had been promised to him. He rubbed the back of his neck, torn between anger at the obvious mix-up and an odd, forgotten warmth stirring inside him. She looked so fragile, so determined not to cry even though the fear in her eyes betrayed her. Samuel's hardened heart wrestled with itself. He should send her back on the next coach. That was the reasonable thing to do. This wasn't her home, and he wasn't her husband. But then he thought of how far she must have traveled, how much courage it had taken to step into a new world with nothing but hope in her suitcase. To turn her away would mean leaving her stranded, perhaps even in danger. The silence stretched too long, the wind whipping through the grass as she finally lifted her chin and whispered, "If you don't want me, I understand. I'll find my way." Samuel's chest tightened at her words. There was strength in her tone, but he could see the tremble in her hands. No one had spoken to him like that in years, open, honest, vulnerable. He exhaled slowly, his voice rough when he finally answered. "I didn't send for you," he admitted, "but it seems you've come a long way. Best not to decide anything just yet. You can rest here until we sort this out." Relief washed over her features, and her eyes glistened with gratitude as she nodded. He motioned toward the small ranch house, its wooden frame sturdy but worn. As they walked side by side, Samuel felt something strange, an awareness he hadn't known in years. Her presence, delicate yet steady, seemed to stir the silence around him. The house, usually so cold and empty, suddenly felt like it had a heartbeat. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 15 years, Samuel Carter felt as though the world had just shifted beneath his boots. And though he tried to resist it, a flicker of something dangerous and unfamiliar sparked within him, hope. The night had fallen quietly over the ranch, the vast Texas sky littered with stars that seemed to pulse with life. Samuel sat on the porch with his usual cup of black coffee, though it had long gone cold. His eyes, however, weren't on the horizon or the cattle sleeping in the pasture. They were on the flickering glow inside his home, the faint light of a lantern casting shadows through the curtains. For 15 years, that house had been silent, empty save for his own movements. Now, within a single day, it had changed. The sound of a woman's gentle footsteps, the faint rustle of her dress as she moved about, even the small sigh she let out as she settled the lantern, all of it had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Inside, Clara, he had finally learned her name, was sitting at the table with her suitcase open. She was organizing what little she had, a worn Bible, a handful of neatly folded dresses, a ribbon, and a locket that she handled with almost reverent care. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, watching her quietly. She noticed him after a moment, her lips parting as though she had been caught in something too private. I didn't mean to intrude, she said, her voice hushed. I can sleep in the barn if it makes you more comfortable. Samuel shook his head, his tone low and certain. You'll sleep inside, it gets cold at night, and you're no ranch hand to be bedding down with the horses. His words made her cheeks flush faintly, and she lowered her gaze, fiddling with the edge of the locket. He wondered then what her story was, what desperation or hope had driven her to sign her life away to a stranger across the country. Breaking the silence, she whispered, when I answered the agency's advertisement, I thought maybe I'd finally find a place where I belonged. My father passed last winter, and with no dowry, no brothers, and no means, I was disposable back east. Her words were quiet, but each one carried the weight of truth that made Samuel's chest ache in an unfamiliar way. He had thought himself alone in his burdens, but here sat a woman who carried her own scars, her own story of abandonment. Samuel cleared his throat, suddenly feeling unsteady. This ranch, it's no easy life. Long days, harder nights. Loneliness that eats at you. I wouldn't have asked anyone to share that with me. His voice faltered slightly, as if the confession itself was something forbidden. She looked at him then, her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that surprised him. Sometimes, she said softly, loneliness is harder to bear than any hard work. That simple truth struck him deeper than any argument could. For 15 years, Samuel had buried his heart in silence and labor. Yet here was this woman, unexpected and uninvited, peeling back the walls he had so carefully built. He found himself stepping further into the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor as he sat across from her at the table. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable now, it was charged, filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Her eyes, bright yet weary, lingered on him as if she was trying to see the man beneath the rough exterior. He shifted uncomfortably, unused to being studied in such a way. To distract himself, he asked, "What's in the locket?" Her fingers tightened around it protectively before she slowly opened it and turned it toward him. Inside was a tiny sketch, worn with time. My mother, she explained, her voice tender. She died when I was little, but I carry her with me. Samuel nodded, the ache in his chest deepening. He knew what it was like to lose someone you thought would never leave. The lantern's light flickered, casting their shadows across the wooden walls, and for the first time in years, Samuel felt the heavy silence of his home lifting. Clara smiled faintly, almost nervously, and said, I don't expect anything from you, Mr. Carter. I don't want to be sent away. Samuel's jaw tightened. He should have told her the truth again, that she didn't belong here, that this wasn't meant to be. But the words refused to come. Instead, he found himself saying something that startled even him. Then don't go. Clara blinked, her lips parting in surprise. Don't go, she repeated, her voice fragile with hope. Samuel leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on hers. Stay here, at least until you decide otherwise. This ranch, it hasn't known much laughter or softness in a long time. Maybe it's about time it did. Her hand trembled as she closed the locket and pressed it to her chest. For the first time since she had stepped off that stagecoach, she allowed herself to smile, a real smile, small but genuine. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking just enough to reveal the emotion she was holding back. Samuel rose to his feet, needing the distance before the feelings overwhelming him grew stronger. You should get some rest, he said gruffly, though his tone was softer than before. Tomorrow will be a long day. I'll show you the land. She nodded, her eyes following him as he walked to the door. Outside, Samuel breathed in the cool night air, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He told himself it was just kindness, just decency that made him offer her a place. But deep down, He knew it was more than that. Clara had stirred something he thought had long died within him. A warmth, a longing, a dangerous flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, life had given him a second chance, disguised as a mail-order bride who had arrived by mistake.